Please join us in welcoming CEO of Event Leaders Exchange, Nicola Kastner, and President of Bishop-McCann, Rob Adams, in conversation with Skift Meetings Executive Editor, Andrea Doyle.
Hello, what a great day it's been. So you are all event strategists in this room, and I'm curious to find out, are you finding it harder to balance what attendees want with what business leaders demand? If you're finding that is a case, please raise your hand. Okay, great. This is going to be something we're going to talk about after this session in our comparing notes. Also, I want to remind everyone, if you have questions throughout the session, please be sure to put them in the app. So we're joined by two executives who have an interesting perspective on the future of events. I'm curious to find out if you are both finding it harder to balance the wants of attendees with the demands of business leaders, and what is that sweet spot?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this from two perspectives, actually. So prior to taking on this role, I was the Global Vice President of Event Marketing Strategy at SAP. So I think about it from my SAP role, as well as this role where I lead a community of more than 120 global heads of events. So we talk about these things all the time. So I just wanted everybody to understand the context of where I'm answering it from. I think yes is the simple answer. I often think about it as a Venn diagram where there's the business needs, the attendee needs, and the middle of them is that sweet spot. You add in the budget layer to that third area of the Venn diagram, and it makes it even more complicated, I think. So there is a fine line balance between the two.
Okay. Are you finding this to be the case as well?
For sure. I mean, it's definitely a conversation that we're hearing all the time. I mean, as I look at if I look at the two personas, right, of stakeholders and attendees, there's a lot of similarities too. Okay. If you look at what the stakeholders are wanting, they want an event where there's purpose and there's trust and obviously ROI, right? Mm-hmm. From an attendee perspective, there's also a lot of similarities as well. They want to be in an environment where there's purpose and trust, and I think from the ROI perspective, it's, we really have to think about what is it that they're looking for, which is a lot more around social connections and events. So, and to your point, I think the one challenge that is definitely there is, as we've all seen, is just these recessionary times that we're in, and the challenges around budgets and wanting an experience that's 10x of what they had the year before with half the budget.
So there is a focus on creating meetings for the whole attendee, which means you must take the tangible and the intangible. Tangible being the number of attendees, a venue, the intangible, the feelings created. How do you plan meetings for the entire attendee?
Want to start?
Yeah. So when I think about the tangible versus intangible, I think that there's a big shift that's happened around. There's the intangible, as I talk a lot about our mission of joy, and joy is, and as I talk about, is joy is trust and purpose, right? But I think that there's this thing happening too. We have to realize that because of what we all went through during the pandemic, there was a fundamental change that happened, and that is that. People think differently. I mean, there's things like much more intentionality of our time. There's a lot more need for connections, but in a much more in an intentional way. But also that we have this other things, all these generations right. that we have, and I think that and realizing that the Gen Zs and there's a whole conversation we can have around the Gen Zs and the Gen Xs and millennials. That we have to be much more thoughtful about what their experience is.
I mean, the data Ken shared with us earlier is that Gen Z is going to outnumber baby boomers in the workforce this year.
Yes.
How do you feel about that, Nicola?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the whole attendee, there's a come back to this whole balance thing again. There's a fine line balance of what we can do to cater to the whole attendee in a business conference environment, right? Just think about where we are today. I think it's about creating moments of connection, it's about serendipity. That's the beauty of events. When Reggie was talking about events golden hour earlier, I actually think I agree with him that coming out of the pandemic, it is events golden hour because the power of them is now known. We know what it feels like when they go away and what the impact of business is. So we've got this really unique opportunity to harness this gift that we've been given in the industry, but we need to think about how do we design, to your point, for the whole self, but for the new way of business as well, right? To your point, we've got all the generations, but business hasn't slowed down. Business has sped up post-pandemic. So we used to bring people to corporate events and want to hold them hostage for 3 days. Might be speaking from my previous life here, but we'd want to maximize every single minute that they spent with us. We cannot do that anymore. So I think that is translating into a different event design and a focus in events differently in now, and will continue to do so.
Is it important to focus on the business impact of the event and speak the language of the C-suite to get a seat at the table?
Oh yeah, for sure. I write about this all the time on LinkedIn. There's a distinct difference between the events business and the business of events, and we have to understand that events are designed to serve a business purpose. No matter the type of event, whether it's an internal event, it's an incentive program, it's a customer-facing event, there is an outcome that needs to be driven. And so if we lead with understanding business objectives, business outcomes, what we're trying to achieve, versus with the logistics and food and beverage and those type of things, that changes the dialogue about events, that changes the way that you address your stakeholders, it changes the way people perceive you, to Monique's point earlier, and it allows you to earn that seat at the table. You will never earn a seat at the table if you're talking about logistics.
Yeah. Reminds me of so gosh, 7 years ago, I was with one of our clients, and I happened to be in their office, and they were getting ready to present to the CEO about their previous conference. And the ratings had gone down by 15%. And so I was curious. I said, so I would love to just understand what's the conversation going to be with your CEO? And she shares this presentation, and she says it wasn't good. And I said, what wasn't good? She said, food and beverage. I mean, we got nailed in our food and beverage. And I said, so when you get that, seeing that, so what's the recommendation that you're making? And she said, well, and there's a whole line item that she had, which was 3. I'm asking for an additional $3 million in food and beverage. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if somebody walked into my office and said, Rob, the meeting didn't go well, and the insight is that people, they weren't so happy with the food and beverage, and I'm gonna ask for $3 million more. I'm like, are you kidding me? And so I think that
you're not going to be my client next week if you go and ask for that, by the way.
So I think that is for for our industry, also some education of how to have the right conversation with stakeholders.
Okay.
And leading with outcomes, right?
For sure.
And talking about results that matter. There's no way that a CSAT or whatever went down that much just because the food and beverage wasn't good, right? But that's probably what was picked up on as the thing in the comments, because that's what people write about often versus really understanding what the root of the problem was as well, right?
Well, that brings up the topic that's near and dear to your heart, data. How important is data in driving decisions to the C-suite when it comes to events?
I think outside of even the C-suite, I think data is the foundation of every decision that should be made in every event. Outside of even those conversations, you have to lead those conversations with data. In fact, data is my favorite thing to talk about. I'm really a nerd about it, and I could go on for hours. But data for data's sake isn't helpful. Right? It's what is the right data that you need to collect to give you the right insights to make the right decisions and to have the right impact conversations. And so, that really, in my mind, means understanding the objectives, what you're trying to achieve. That leads to what is the right data that you need to collect and report on. Data and measurement shouldn't start at the end of the process. It has to be the foundation of any sort of event strategy or design.
Okay.
I completely agree. I think that when I think about the topic of data, we're also in this very new time period of this topic, right, of AI. I saw an article this weekend that said that it's going to be a $5 trillion in terms of R&D for AI. So as I think about, like today, when we're thinking about what KPIs do we want to measure, it's going to start shifting here shortly to where it's going to be what outcomes do we want, and then if we have the right information with personas of information, it actually will be able to give us what that experience should look like to actually know what the outcome should be. So I think it's an interesting time, the period that we're in, that I see a shift happening where we're going to start to be able to have the technology to be able to support predictable outcomes.
But AI is just a tool in the toolbox. It can never replace the role of an event strategist, can it?
Agree.
Okay.
Agree.
So let's shift gears for a moment and talk about sustainability. The industry is grappling with sustainability pressures. How can event strategists realistically balance the need for impactful events with the growing demand of sustainability?
So I think at the end of the day, we have to make the most sustainable choices around our events and decisions around our events, but events are never going to be the most sustainable choice that can be made. And I fully believe that we are in a predicament where we could land up like we were in 2009 with the AIG crisis. And just to refresh everybody's memory, if you don't remember what that was, in 2009, AIG had taken some government bailout money and then shortly thereafter ran an incentive travel trip for independent sales reps. Probably the qualification, we know how incentives work, qualification was probably, a year before, but the timing was terrible and the optics were terrible at the time of this event. The entire business events industry was decimated after this. Like trillions upon trillions of dollars of event spend was canceled, and the impact to the surrounding communities was massive. Sustainability has the opportunity to be that next crisis for us if we don't get ahead of it. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't host events, because events are powerful. We know that. We've just talked about that. We need to be able to talk about the impact of events to avoid these crises, because what happened was AIG never told the story of why the event, what the outcomes of the event was, what it had driven to the business bottom line, to the independent sales reps' bottom lines, to the community that they were meeting in. None of those stories of impact were ever told. We have to tell impact stories about our events to counter the sustainability challenge that I think is going to come and bite us one day quite soon.
I was with again, one of our clients, and we were having a very open dialogue about sustainability. And she was talking about how it's very challenging trying to get a lot of buy-in for some of her stakeholders. And we had a meeting with some of the other stakeholders, and part of the conversation is that you've got to look at what is actually the outcome you're looking for the event. And then let's just put sustainability on the first side for just a moment.
Okay.
If you look at the stakeholders, in this case, it was the stakeholders of marketing and sales. We want an outcome of growth, increased sales. HR wants to attract and retain key talent. CFO wants to make sure that the money that we're spending, we're getting an ROI on it. If you think about sustainability and how that impacts going back to generations, we talked about let's just focus on the Gen Zs. If you are not doing this, if you're not making it much more intentional, you realize that you actually have a brand that people will not want to go to. I mean, they literally are making brand decisions based upon that. And so if you think about the Gen Zs, you think about millennials that want to be part of more of a community, that's the language that they start to understand that, wait a minute, not only is it important for the planet, but it's also important for business. And I think that as an industry, I think that's an area of opportunity of helping the industry understand not only just the impact of the planet, but also to the business.
I totally relate to what you're saying, as I have a daughter who's a Gen Zer, and she sifts through my garbage when she comes to visit. Make sure I'm recycling.
That's a whole other conversation we'll have later.
So based on today's session, one theme, and all the sessions today, one theme is, we've heard repeatedly, is the importance of speaking the business language of the C-suite. Would you say that's imperative?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and what I think the question is, what is that, right? So people might say, well, how do I speak that language? Tell me what that is. And in my mind, it's speaking about outcomes. It's using the right words, going back to Monique's point, investment. Where are you going to make an investment versus I need $3 million for food and beverage? That's not an investment, that's a cost. So it's using the right words. It's understanding what's important to them. I once had somebody that I was mentoring, and she had a meeting with her CEO, and her CEO had said, I want you to walk me through the sponsorship program for the event. And so she said, would you mind looking at my presentation? I said, of course I'll look at your presentation. And she had pictures of the booths and where each of the booths would be located, and what a 10 by 10 looked like, a 10 by 20 turnkey booth. And I said, that's not what your CEO is asking you for. He's asking you, what is the partner integration strategy? What is the revenue model of the sponsorships? And who are the people that we're targeting? He doesn't want to see a picture of a booth. And she was like, but that's all I have. And I'm like, well, I think you've got a late night ahead of you tonight. That's the language of business. So it's understanding, I think the concept of speaking the language of business is somewhat nebulous. And it's really leading with outcomes and understanding what those outcomes the business is trying to derive, and then how can you help achieve them through the event program. And then speaking with data, using data to back it up.
So we have a bunch of questions that came in. Do you have any suggestions for a planner on how to make data-driven decisions for a new event that doesn't have any past event data available?
Do you want to take this, or do you want me to?
Go first.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Yes. So if it was me, and if I was designing an event from scratch or an event strategy from scratch, what I would do is I would look at multiple things. I would first of all start on the business strategy, your marketing strategy, understand those things. Understand the needs of the business, stakeholder interviews. Then I would understand your clients. Who are your clients? What are their needs? Why are they coming to your events? What other events do you have in your portfolio as well that are targeting the same audience? So if you've got an event that is to reach a specific audience and you're already touching them at 17 other events, you may not actually need this event. So understanding who the audience is and how you're reaching them. And then I would also look at what are your competitors doing that are looking at for the same audience. So I'm like the queen of the visuals. If you think about that as a four circle diagram, in the middle of that, that's where your event strategy. So they're all different data sets that you can pull in. I would also be looking at your past event data that are targeting the same audiences as well. So you may not have data specifically about that event, but you will sure have enough data that you can use to make a data-driven strategy.
Great.
Anything to add about data?
We could talk about, so I think the question around no past data, so I think that even though you may not have information on the actual event that you've actually done, there is an incredible amount of information right now of, going back to this topic of AI, that the technology that exists today of being able to understand some of the behaviors of what the personas of individual attendees, of what they actually want. There are things now that we actually know that if we create certain experiences, we will have a certain outcome. So I think to your point, I think by combining some of those things of information we actually do know with some information that an aggregate of events that have happened, maybe not your own particular event, but of other events that happen, I think you'll find some good insight there.
We have another audience question. Data is critical, but event surveys are a challenge with low response rates. How do you get reliable and actionable event survey data?
So so this is a hot button of mine of surveys, because I don't think we're ever going to change. As much as we try to change event surveys, there's been so many things that have been tried over the years, it's never going to be what we want it to be. But that's where I think again, getting us kind of shifting to where things are going. The data, where I see data going is, again, the technology that exists today, of being able to understand, there's kind of two parts of that. One is the technology of how do you actually, what is this your experience in this particular moment, but also the data that's actually measuring what is your immersion, like what do you actually, like, I kind of talk about head and heart. What's that heart to head connection that's creating a propensity of people that are actually proponents of the brand or opposite. So I think we as an industry need to start shifting a bit and accepting the technology that can allow us to be able to have more data-driven stats.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is you're never going to get massive survey results. We just ran the Event Leaders Exchange event, and we got 93% survey results, and it was because I hounded every single solitary person daily. It was a small event, so I could do that, right? And I told them, even during my speech, I said, I'm going to hunt you down until you answer this survey. So, but I know those numbers are not normal. But there are things that you can do. One of them is we hear a lot of talk about short registration forms, and in some cases, yes, short is fine. But if it's a paid event, you've got a captive audience where you can ask questions during the registration process. I'm a huge proponent of putting questions in your registration flow because you will get insights. Those are pre-event insights, but they give you really great insights on your audience and on their needs. From a post-event survey, there is one of the best tips I've heard recently from an industry peer colleague, and she spoke about it, Victoria Beatty, if you know her. She said, ask your attendees for their advice, not feedback. There's words that you can use that make people want to give you insights, and I thought that was a really cool takeaway. And then I don't have scientific proof that this works, but I also think you need to show your attendees that you're using the feedback by telling them that we've heard you. I mean, I'll use something really simple. At Sapphire, it was always freezing, which was SAP's big event. It was always freezing in that room. People would always complain about it. So we knew they were going to be complaining about it. So partway through the morning of day one, even though we hadn't changed the temperature, we said, we heard you, we've turned up the temperature. Right? And so because we were collecting feedback in the moment, and we said it on the big screens, we heard you, the temperature's gone up. But if there's ways that you can say to them, this is the way that we are going to use this information, I find people are more likely to respond. But I mean, other than my 93%, I'd say the industry average that I'm seeing is, 12. If you're 12, 15% survey response, you're in a good space.
Well, Skift Meetings listened to its attendees because last year we were in a windowless meeting room, and look at where we are today.
So you did, absolutely.
So I was hoping to end this session with a quick fire of challenges shaping corporate events and then opportunities. So would you like to share with us the challenges you're seeing?
How long, do you want me to just list them off? Because there's lots of things.
Yeah.
Budget, obviously, is an issue, and I'm giving this from perspective from our members, what they've told us. So budget, do more with less. All of us are dealing with those same things over and over and over again. Measurement, what is the right measurement? What is the right data? What is the right organizational structure? Like the list of challenges that people are dealing with today, quite frankly, I don't think are any different than the challenges we were dealing with 10 years ago, other than maybe add, how do I use AI and add that into my equation? But the challenges are still fundamental, and I don't think that they're going to change. It's just, I just think they're here to stay, and we just have to learn to live with them and deal with them.
And what are the challenges you're seeing, Rob?
I mean, I definitely agree with all of your points. There's a couple of things that are top of mind as I think about our industries, I think about Bishop-McCann, I think a lot about, I worry about us stagnating. I worry about that. I saw so much innovation happening during the pandemic. I worry that we may be settling a bit. I I worry a lot about that. Again, during the pandemic, it was the best time in this industry of how many people called me. I mean, competitors would call me and say, "How are you doing?" and wanting to know what I'm doing to survive. And I think that our industry, I worry that our industry doesn't do a good enough job around collaborating with each other. I also think the shift that we're seeing around how we think about people and staffing, and there's this very traditional way of thinking about the events that we have and how many people that we need. And I think there's a new way of doing things with agile talent. And so I think that's something that I see as a huge opportunity for our industry.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I always like to end with a positive. What are the opportunities?
Data.
Okay.
I'm going back to my data. Use data. It doesn't lie. I mean, use it to help you tell your story. Use it to help you work smarter. Use it to figure out what your next step should be.
I'm excited about people that are starting to understand what we do. And I think that understanding that the what we do and the impact that we can have and how I can feel more people are attracted to our industry, that's what I'm most excited about.
Well, this has been wonderful. I thank you both so much, and we're going to continue the conversation in our comparing notes session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.